Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Extra Time, the U.S. Men's National Team Soccer Podcast. I'm Tim. I'm here with my friend Chris. We are back to talk to you guys about all sorts of good things surrounding the U.S. soccer team. We are coming off a CONCACAF Nations League title, back-to-back Nations League titles. Chris, you weren't here to be with us for that. I'm going to get your opinion on that in just a second. But I want to give everybody an idea. This episode, we're going to talk all things Gregg and the U.S. men's national team and the hiring process and how all that went down. We'll give you guys some opinions, some background on Matt Crocker, Gucci Onyewu, try to get some ideas on why this process took so long and all the things that unfolded, and as well as talk about what Gregg's path has to be to establish success in this next cycle. That's coming up as we head into Extra Time. Stick around. All right, Chris, it's good to have you back on this. It has been a while. Ryan and I got a chance to kind of revel, to revel in all the excitement that was the Nations League. So I know you got a chance to watch them. You were still texting us, and you were spoiled on the beach out there. You just couldn't make it to any of these podcasts. So first, how have you been, and what was your take on those two games?
I've been well, like you said. I was at the beach all week, so it was a very enjoyable time with the family. As far as the games go, my overall take is that we looked really good. I was really excited to see the gameplay. I was the one who said before the World Cup that we should have been playing Reyna as that center attacking midfielder. And I heard all of the, announcer, prognosticator people as they talked about the games. And then during the games, they said, oh, man, I really love Gio in this center midfield position. We need to see him more. Just like,
exactly. Yeah, no, you've been Gio's hype man about since, I want to say it's been at least 2 years that you've been hyping Gio, and maybe longer.
Yes, I think it has been about 2 years, probably.
Yeah. Which is great. He played great. Obviously Ryan and
fantastic.
I just couldn't you to talk about him enough, and I hope that we did him justice in the things that we said about him, because it was the easy man of the match for me. He was by far the most impressive player that we had on the field.
And
we had some great players on the field in those games, but just an arm and a leg of everybody else. So hats off to Gio.
Yeah, and then, the only other thing I would say is just how frustrating the Mexico game was, just for all of the extracurriculars, and I really do think the ref, if he had manned up and, called the second yellow card, it would have stopped so much of that.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
But he didn't, and so the players got heated, figured they can get away with stuff, and it just spiraled out of control. So that was frustrating and disappointing. But outside of that, I was really impressed and really excited about both those games. It was awesome.
Yeah, and fortunately for us, it didn't matter. We took the red cards and the injuries in stride. We still had a very dominant performance against Canada. We still came away with the back-to-back win.
Yeah, the guys who had to fill in stepped up and played great. Like, there was barely a drop-off.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a pretty big drop-off when Gio got hurt.
Yes.
And I think because we didn't have, McKennie is very good at being a connective midfielder. And since he and Gio were not there, we lost that connection once he got hurt.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. And we saw a little bit more of the drop-off, obviously, the 75th, 80th minute. But and we're going to touch on this a little bit later. I do think that that's a credit to Gregg playing such a large player pool in the earlier
Sure.
stages of all sorts of things, and we're going to see it
Yeah.
again in the Gold Cup tomorrow. So, or today if you're watching this today, depending on when I get it out. And so, yeah, I it's exciting. We're going to see if that continues to be sort of the DNA of this team and the DNA of Gregg going
Yeah.
forward. But before we get into that, let's get a quick rundown on all of the USA hires up to that point. So first we have Matt Crocker, and so Matt Crocker, he gets hired as what? Like what is his role for U.S. Soccer?
I mean, the sporting director is, I mean, basically, if you're thinking about it in like a company terms, um, the sporting director is the upper management, whereas like the coach is the middle management who actually deals with, the working class, the players. Um, and so the sporting director is the one not necessarily guiding the vision of the program, but he is the one that is making sure all of the other pieces outside of the players themselves, the training facilities, the training programs, all of the other staff, the medical staff, the nutritional staff, all of those other people. He's the one making sure they are all doing their jobs and that everything outside of the coach and the players is working towards making the team what they want it to be.
Right. And so to give a little bit more background on Matt Crocker. So Matt Crocker, he had started his career in U.S. Soccer, right? Just kind of coaching at some lower level academies and stuff. Moved his way over to Europe, where he worked with Southampton. And he was primarily, he had two stints at Southampton. The primary one was that he was their like academy coach for about 2006 to 2012. And the only noticeable players that come through, like James Ward-Prowse, and then somewhere probably in there, and it's tough to tell how much he had a role in it, is Gareth Bale and Loftus-Cheek. And so, not that those aren't quality players, right? Like James Ward-Prowse is phenomenal. Not a lot of talent necessarily coming in or out. You had mentioned before we started talking Southampton getting relegated. I think that's super relevant given that his contract technically still goes through to August 2nd. So
Mm-hmm.
the Southampton club released him to do things for us because U.S. Soccer was very adamant. We wanted to get a sporting director in before the Women's World Cup starts, and that will start soon in the next couple of weeks in July. And so he has a lot of experience, right? He's got this Premier League experience. He's seen higher quality talent. His primary role was developing talent. He sees a more senior level stint and a more player related role on the field in his second go around at Southampton. They wound up getting relegated. Knowing what we know about him, do you think that he's the right fit for the direction that U.S. Soccer is going?
Um,
And primarily with the players that we have, right? Like looking at the current set of player
yeah.
pools, is somebody, I guess, I'll ask a question a little bit more straightforward. Do we need somebody with more of an academy mindset with the players that we have?
I mean, I think yes. I do think his background is suited for the role. You know, like you said, in the Premier League, which you can argue all day long about which is actually the best league, between the top five Europe leagues. Um, but often, if you listen to players, the league that they want to play in is the Premier League. Like they may say they want to play for a team like Real Madrid or Barcelona or Bayern Munich, but when they say about the league that they want to play in, it's the Premier League. And a big part of that is all of the other stuff, the infrastructure and, um, the stadiums and everything that goes into making a team what it is. And so him having that experience with an actual Premier League side, whether he actually did a good job there or not, it's hard to say how much of that is his fault. as far as
Right. You're
how
looking
the
at a
team was
whole
guided.
club, and yeah.
Yeah. Um, but that's not necessarily a glowing recommendation, the fact that they did get relegated. But he has the experience, like you said, working with academy, seeing the youth. Um, Obviously, we have a very young player pool at the moment, and we want to be able to develop them well. So that experience is good. The Premier League experience is good. So I guess I'm hopeful that he will be a good fit, but it's hard to say he will do well because he doesn't really have a record of accomplishing anything.
Right. And so to give a little bit more information from the USA Soccer side, so the United States Soccer Federation president is Cindy Parlow Cone. We've talked about her a little bit when we were talking about post World Cup stuff with Gregg. And when she was interviewed by ESPN, she said that Crocker brings a wealth of knowledge, having worked at various roles and various levels of the game. I'm quoting now. He will set the sporting vision for U.S. soccer and implement the technical plan. And this is what I think is the key part and why we see him coming in the role that he's in. He will set the technical plan for the women's and men's extended and youth national teams. So we have seen a big push in U.S. soccer for the development of academies, and I do believe that we are reaping the benefits of that push. I think this was
Yeah,
one of the
definitely.
things that U.S. soccer has done, where you're getting a lot of bang for your buck. Right? We need to
Well,
overhaul the whole program. And sorry, go. Yeah.
and I was just going to say, a lot of what we're seeing now, even though Greg is kind of reaping the benefits of it, this comes from when Jurgen Klinsmann was the coach. He had a strong focus on, the youth and developing the youth system for the various MLS teams and for the national team program. Um, and so if we can build on what he started and continue that, hopefully, we can just get better and better.
Agreed. And so we're gonna, because the next step obviously is we're gonna touch a little bit about Aguchi Onyewu. And so before we do that, just to get in everybody's mind, one of the comments that Matt had said about Gregg was kind of in regards to the current team. And so NBC Chicago had an article out, and the quote was, "What I see from the current team is an aggressive, forward-thinking, fearless team that went to the World Cup and did some great stuff. And I'm really, really keen to make sure that we can produce a coach that can replicate and continue to drive forward some of those same behaviors. Clearly, there's been some great foundations put in place by Gregg and by Anthony. That's Anthony Hudson, who had taken over. So this is obviously in his interim period around the style, and we want to continue to evolve that style of play. And so I think that's really relevant to the conversation that we're going to be having about Gregg, just getting an idea of what U.S. Soccer's mindset was going through this entire hiring process. But let me see if I can bring us over to Gooch's announcement here. And I think I can. So we'll head on over this. So Gooch comes in, and he's the vice president. He gets announced he's the vice president of sporting. Right? Like, Gooch is the vice president of sporting. What do you make of that title? And
Uh,
what do you make of this role? Because this is a role that they sort of made up for him and created for him.
yeah. Um, well, judging from the title, I really don't know. But from what I have heard, from some of the pundits, who a lot of them are former teammates of Gooch and, might have a little bit more insight. Um, from what I have heard and kind of gathered is that this is more of a player relationship role, um, in that, as we talked about, Matt is going to be overseeing kind of the whole structure and making sure all of the support is in place, for the various teams and for the various tournaments that may be coming. And I think Gooch is going to be more of a almost like the liaison between the players themselves and Matt, to trying to get the vision, get Matt's vision across to the players and get the players' feedback and the players' desires across to Matt. So that's what it seems like from what I have heard of people talking about, that's kind of the vision and the idea for this role, which I think Gooch is a good fit for.
You
You
think
know,
this
he
role, just
go
hearing the
ahead.
language that you said, do you think this role, and I really hate to do this, and it's not really my intention. Do you think this role has anything to do with the Reina situation?
Probably, yeah.
Because that was when you said that, I
Yes,
was
I
like, oh
think
my
it does.
gosh, like
I
somebody
think
in the
it's
interim for player feelings, and that's just like, oh my
yes. I
gosh,
mean,
like,
I
you know,
do think it's a little bit of a check and balance for Gregg. You know, the hires came so close together. You kind of think they said like, well, if we bring Gregg back, we need a mediary. You know, we need a mediator. We need an intermediary to help us
mhm.
handle these relationships.
Yeah. So you think that's fair? Because because the other side of this is, people going like, Tim, you're reading into this too much, right?
Mhm.
Like this is a bigger thing. This is a cultural thing. This is the United States trying to get more into it. But another thing is, we look over at another article.
I
So the United
I mean, I think it
States,
can be both.
it can be so, but I'm looking at, so from on March 19th, right? This is from MLS Soccer. The United States was projected to operate at a $9.5 million deficit for the 2024 fiscal year.
Mhm.
So I mean, that's not a small number, and I know that you're probably planning on making it up in the future, but
I think the
you're going to say
reality
that
is,
everything's on the table, and that, you want to be
yeah,
smart with how you spend your money, but you want to make sure you got all these people in place, and we know that we budgeted all this stuff and all these tidbits. We're actively interviewing all these various things. The sporting director position gets turned, right? So then we got several candidates. So Aguchian Yewu is going to be the sporting director. Whoever gets selected is a super strategic role for U.S. Soccer. This job's huge, and so let's see, taking on the responsibilities under sporting director before. Sporting director really like it. I don't know, and I guess I could be reading into it too much, but it's so strange to me to think that, like, I don't know.
no,
You're spending a lot
honestly,
of money on a position. Like, this position better be worth it.
yeah. I think honestly, I think it's both. I think somebody said, well, if we're bringing Gregg back, we're going to need something to make sure he doesn't piss the players off again. And somebody said, well, maybe it would be good to have somebody who talks to the players all the time, who can, help us get a feel for what's going on.
Right. Well, and so to me
You
though,
know,
that
and
that that makes me think,
and that
like,
you
if
have
that's the
you
real
have both.
possibility, like, is this really the direction that we want to go, right? Like, if you're in the
Mhm.
mindset where you're like, hey, maybe we should think about, like, just that initial discussion, like somebody going, you think we should maybe bring somebody in so that, like, Gregg doesn't do something dumb again, like, and everybody's like, oh, maybe, like, well, why not just not hire Gregg, like, which makes me think there
Yeah.
has to be more to this position, right?
Well,
Like,
I think there will be, and that's why I say I think it's both. I think his role will be a lot more than that.
mhm.
It'll be overseeing all the teams. Um, it'll be making sure all the players are, on the same page and understanding, and making sure that the vision of the higher ups, of Matt Crocker specifically, that vision is matching what the coaches' visions are. I think all of that will be involved, but that means if there's a problem like this again, you have somebody whose job it is to handle it.
Agreed. I can see that. I can see that. Okay, so all this now kind of brings us to the next question on this list, right? Which is, so this announcement first off gets leaked, right? We're in the middle of the Mexico game,
Yeah.
and the commentators are basically revealing, well, we just kind of caught word that, like, Gregg's going to be the next coach, right? Which to me not only sort of undermines, not like, first off, the leak undermined the whole process, right?
Yeah,
But
definitely.
also it, again, like, I just can't handle a lot of the soccer media, right? You didn't have to announce it. You know what I'm saying? Like, somebody slid you
I
a piece of
know.
paper, right? They slid you a piece of paper and they're like, "Hey, we just discovered this leak." And I know that your brain's just like, "Ooh, juicy gossip," and you
Yeah.
want to spit it out, but, like, also somebody there needs to have the discretion right? Because if you're gonna give Gregg attitude for talking about Geo in a conference that he thought was not gonna be public, then you also need to have the same discretion to go, I can still talk about this. Let's talk about this after the game. Because they literally went to the halftime show. They're lined up with the questions. I can't remember the British girl's name who does like she's basically the role of, I'm going to pitch a question and I'm going to watch Clint just butcher it. But,
Kate Abdo, by the way, quick caveat. If you ever watch the Champions League, the Paramount Plus Champions League coverage, she's amazing.
I love her.
When she comes to do
that's
the
like with
US
her and Thierry Henry and them, right?
Yes, they're fantastic. So when she comes to do these US games, I'm always sitting there like, I'm so sorry. This is not representative of the US in general.
You know what I mean? Like, she's got to be pulling her hair out, right? But so you know that she's lined up to have all these questions, and instead, all you have is Charlie and Clint going like, what do we do? Why did this take so long? Like what's going on? And their comments were accurate, and I appreciated how raw and like authentic they were, because this is now just an unscripted moment. And most people watching us are probably familiar with In Soccer We Trust, right? So Charlie is very vocal on that, right, alongside Heath Pearson, Jimmy Conrad, and so I know a lot of Charlie's opinions, and I've kind of grown to like him as. Maybe not necessarily like a commentator. I don't mind him as a commentator. I've come to like him as like that content person where like behind the scenes, like when you just let him talk, you get a bigger picture of it. But yeah, I didn't like that it was released there. I thought like, let's talk about the Mexico game and then let's
focus on the game at hand, and you can talk about it after. No, I absolutely agree.
And then in the 90th minute rolls around and everything goes away, and you're like, well, before we get to your guys' post game thoughts, let's lay this thing on the table. But anyway, so all this comes up, and now you and I are faced with the same question that everybody wants to know the answer to, that Clint speculated on, that Charlie speculated on, which is, why did we waste 6 months just to wind up with the same person that we had? Doesn't it feel like we just wasted 6 months of training? We went through 2 interim coaches.
I'm surprised I haven't heard this or seen this from anybody yet, but the obvious answer to me is they were waiting until the end of the club seasons to see if any coaches came available, and the ones that they were interested in either said no or re-up with their clubs, and so they said, well, we don't have anybody better, we'll go back to Gregg.
And as much as it hurts to hear you say that,
the 6 months were not necessarily, those 6 months probably were spent looking at those club coaches and saying, like, which ones are we interested in? But the time was not necessarily about how much work was going into that time. It was just the timing of, well, we can't actually ask them until the club seasons are over.
Mm-hmm. And so to give, you guys at home an idea of some of the coaches they would be talking about. So Jesse Marsh, even though he had very early on declared like there's just no chance, U.S. Soccer then still released a statement saying like no, like he's probably still in the running, as well as Jim Curtin, who's the Philadelphia Union's head coach, and then I want to say one of the FC people was also in there. And yes,
they were looking at Patrick Vieira too.
Yeah, and then what? Like they threw out some ridiculous names. Like Jose Mourinho's name got thrown out. Like Zinedine Zidane's name got thrown out. Thierry Henry. So like, and I know that like I'm going to be bold and say it's outrageous, and I'm going to echo something that I heard Charlie Davies say, which is we don't have unlimited money, right? Like we're the U.S. men's national team. No. Like this is not a glorifying position. They're not like coaches like. Just because you're an American doesn't mean like you can't have a sense of reality and just be like I love this crest. This crest is not drawing those names, right?
No,
so kind of like you said, and it hurts to hear it in that fashion, but that's the truth, right? Like the club season ended, U.S. Soccer's probably like maybe there's a chance here, maybe there's a chance here, maybe there's a chance here, and everybody just turns around and walks away. And when the dust settled, Gregg's just there with a smile on his face, like I'll still take it. And so we're just like, all right, I guess. We're going back to Gregg. and the only other possibility, which if this is true, we'll never hear about because there's already been enough
Mhm.
drama, is that Gregg was still under investigation. Right. That's that and
Yeah,
it's I'm not saying
which
it's like
is a
super right.
possibility.
It's just the only other
Yeah,
possibility. I'm not saying it's like super
yeah,
likely or saying that's what I think is happening. It's the only other avenue that makes sense, right? You're either
yeah.
waiting for the
No,
rest of the coaches
absolutely.
and the candidates to do a thing and the contract timing is awkward because like the seasons don't line up, right? So like darn it, his contract ended in December. We're not going to give him a 6 months extension because Gregg doesn't want that. He's probably because Gregg's smart, right? So he's probably like either want all of it or none of it. So they're like, okay,
Yeah. Oh,
you get
absolutely.
none of it. These 6 months go by. You know, maybe he's under investigation, maybe he's not. We don't really know. Like we had definitive things with the Reynas. There's probably a lot of fallout from that. Maybe they're waiting for the fallout to be done. Um, Either way, it's behind us. It doesn't look like it hurt us too much, right? Like we have two interim coaches come through. We crushed through
No,
the
yeah, they
Nations
were.
League.
I mean, the reality is they were both on Greg's staff. They've been around the players a lot. And for me, at least, especially if you look at Callahan and the way he coached them, he obviously is working with the players all the time, in Greg's practices because his relationship with the players from what I saw on the sidelines and his substitutions and lineups and everything just made so much sense. So
Mm-hmm.
we didn't lose anything by having these, interim coaches.
Right. Okay. So to give an idea of what U.S. Soccer was, looking for. So this is from U.S. Soccer, right? This was their breakdown of what they were looking for in the head coaching role, right? The top priorities.
Mhm.
And this article comes out June 16th, right? So I mean
So just before.
we're talking right like it wasn't it leaked on the 15th, like
Oh, okay.
you know what I'm saying? Like this is like an awkward time for this article to kind of be coming out,
Yeah.
saying that
Or
like
maybe the perfect time.
right. So and the title is a breakdown of the rigorous process in the search for the U.S. men's team head coach, which like
Yeah. Okay.
you basically already have one. But anyway, so they divide into three categories. So they were looking for somebody who could lead, right? And leading was own, deliver, and measure the team strategy, looking at squad selection, lead your staff, direct the club, coach engagement. You're an ambassador of sponsorship activities, blah, blah, blah. Technical line management, all that. And then accountable
Okay.
for season, event planning, and game schedule. This is now all in guide, right? So empowering the overall team, responsible for game planning and reviewing of the coaching and data, responsible for opposition analysis, support squad auditing, player scouting, be part of the soccer leadership team, provide pathway support. And then they identified a bunch of competencies. So you're going to drive a vision led identity, build relationships. You're an effective planner. You self manage. You value communication. You're a decisive decision maker. You're a creative innovator. You're a passionate developer. Okay. So we've read all of those things. And so now, Chris, I'm gonna kind of pick a couple of them and I'm going to go to you because the question now is Gregg the right call, right? So you've just
Yeah.
made this whole list. Okay. And now you've said, this is what we were doing. This is our rigorous process. Here are the values that we wanted to see. And we believe that Gregg can be those people. So when you think of drives a vision led identity, right? So genuinely lives, knows, and understands the purpose and vision of the organization. How does Gregg fit or not fit that for you?
Um, I think he fits it because this team right now is operating off of the identity and vision that he gave them from the last cycle. So I think he fits that for the team right now. And my big question mark there is, can that move forward? He he created this identity for them. Well, I shouldn't say he created it for them. He fostered this identity in the team of everybody's
Mm-hmm.
we're a big family. We've got each other's backs. We're all fighting for each other every game, and you know for almost all of his tenure, he did a great job of that. That was, part of his player recruitment process was saying like, you're going to be part of this family. You're going to be, celebrated. You're going to be pushed and you're going to be supported. And he did a good job for the majority of his tenure. Really, the only tough spots in there were Geo and stuff with John Brooks.
Mm-hmm. And if we go
So
if we recall
yeah,
back at the very beginning, he did take a very firm stance in what he was expecting out of his team. Because
yeah,
I remember almost right off the bat, Weston McKinney didn't get to play because he
yeah.
broke like team protocol in a hotel room, right? So
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that we do know that Gregg established almost right off the bat, was this sense of identity and this sense of purpose. And I thought it was so important because you got a team that, we hadn't qualified for the World Cup. We didn't have an identity. We've just wiped the slate with all the old guys, and we're bringing in all these new guys, right? Outside of Christian and a couple other players, this is it, right?
Yeah,
So like you have Christian, you have Akasa, and like Yedlin, and some of the older veterans that you weren't really expecting to play a role in the World Cup, but you knew you were going to have to rely on their experience to kind of get them there. And I do think, reading through this, that's one of the things that everybody will say about Gregg is he definitely has a vision. Whether you agree with the vision or not is a completely separate conversation. But Gregg
yeah.
certainly had a vision of exactly what he wanted, right? To the fault that you and I and Ryan were all disappointed that he couldn't get away from that vision in the Netherlands game. Right?
Yeah.
Like he just
And
so
in several
badly
games during qualifying, there were
right.
several games where it was like, you got to change something up here. They're shutting everything down.
Right. And so you had touched on, so the next two things were building relationships and being an effective planner. And so you had touched on the relationships, and I think the players have it speaks for them. They speak for themselves in this, in how many players have come out and voiced like their backing for Gregg. Right? Like
Yeah.
we haven't had a lot of players come out, well, we haven't had any players come out and say like, no, this is a joke. I wasn't consulted on this. It was pretty unanimous that the players were like, yeah, this is a guy that we like. This is a guy that we
I
appreciate.
don't think anybody asked Gio, but everybody that they did ask said yes, they were in support of Gregg.
Correct. Well, and in the announcement, for those who might not have seen it, they make mention that one specific player was talked to about the situation, and they don't mention the player by name, which nobody's dumb. We know that Giovanni Reyna was informed of this in a completely different context than the rest of the players, right?
Yeah.
And it, given how Gio played in the Canada game, I don't really think it's going to matter, right? And one of the things that I also agree with is, one, Gio is not his parents, and two,
Yes.
Gio is a completely different player than he was during the World Cup, right? I didn't see a Gio on the field that had a negative attitude, that didn't seem like he wanted to hustle. And I also didn't see a Gio that like his injury was legit, and I know that lines up with him, but not this kind of injury. Gio's injuries previously were like this weird muscle condition that he's got. This was like some dude was a jerk and like just tackled him. And here we are with this thing. But the next is, so we as an effective planner, right? The ability to organize, delegate, and plan on a long-term based vision and strategy. All this stuff kind of goes together, right? He sees beyond the result of the next game, and works and respects the planning process, again, almost to a fault. So the next series of things is his ability to manage himself and the communication, like the value that he places in communication. So where do you see Gregg in those two areas, especially given that those two areas were what directly caused the giant conflict that came off the World Cup? His inability to sort of manage himself and communicate in the wrong spot.
I think, when it all came out and we talked about it back then, we went back and forth about what Gregg's mindset was going into that conference where he talked about it. And I was of the opinion, and I hold that opinion still, that Gregg really was naive enough to believe that nobody was going to share what he talked about. And so, given that context, I think, it was done in good faith on his part of actually trying to, help this leadership conference.
Mm-hmm.
But, going forward from that, my hope and my plea to him is
Yeah.
please learn from that.
Right.
Learn from it. Don't talk about your big locker room issues, with public, anybody outside of
Right.
the program.
At least not
Don't.
in that way and not until it's long done and over.
Yeah, exactly. Wait till it's 10 years down the road and that player has, accomplished all the great things that their
Right.
career will
Or even
accomplish.
or
Then
even
you can go
wait
back.
until you and that player have healed. Because
Yeah.
it's
Yes,
not like
absolutely.
he said this thing, right, and he makes this statement and then the media figure it out and they go to Gio and Gio's reaction is like, "Oh yeah, this thing happened, but like, Greg and I talked through it and
We
like I
worked
really
it
appreciate it."
out. Yeah.
Like Gio was basically just like, "Yeah, like this sucks. Like I busted my butt and didn't get to play." And you're just like, "Oh, this is a fresh wound. Like this was not the right
Yeah.
time to be talking about it." Um yeah. And so yeah, it doesn't do us any good to dive into those things. But I agree with what you're saying. Like I think he was naive enough. I agree. I hope he learns from that. And this can be an area of growth and self
Please
management.
learn from it.
Please learn from it. So that to go into like the final things, we're looking at being a decisive decision maker, a creative innovator, and a passionate developer, right? So now his ability to take everything from the past and adapt it to be able to take all this information, right, filter it, be confident to act in the information, make these decisions to come up with, in their words, is a solution for the way forward. They want you to push boundaries, be innovative and competitive, and have a genuine desire to help everyone around them get better on and off the field. How do you see Gregg, again, fitting or not fitting this final piece of the puzzle?
Um, the passionate developer part, I can agree with that. He is. He really does care about this team. He cares about these players, and he cares about the program continuing to develop and continuing to improve. The creative innovator, not so much. He has this style, which is a good style, but it's also, the style of the top teams in the world from like 5 to 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So that's not innovation. It is innovation for the US team because for a long time we didn't have the player quality to actually be able to play, with this type of passing and movement and ball control. So it is innovative for us, but it is not innovative or creative in, the wider world of soccer. And, as we've talked about, we saw his deficiencies in the World Cup, especially the Netherlands game. We saw a little bit of it in the England game where, again, we just couldn't break through. But we especially saw it in the Netherlands game where, the holes in our strategy were exploited so well,
Mm-hmm.
and we just didn't have an answer for it.
Right.
And so
I agree.
he needs to get better at that, or he needs to find somebody who will help him and who he will listen to improve that.
Agreed. Because one of the things, and I think that's the complete right category to have this conversation in, because the last set of text that they use is being open-minded to new ways and ideas, but always built on the back of strong foundations. And I believe that we got that second part right, and you touched on it, that we have the foundation. We
Yeah.
just didn't know when to get away from it, right? And to give
Yeah.
examples of a process that I think is obviously still very much in the making, but that we have seen breakthrough in, is during the Canada game in those first 10 minutes, Canada did what we expected Canada to do. They were either going to pick a low block or a high press because they knew those were the two things the United States struggled with, and they weren't going to let our midfield do midfield stuff. And
Yeah.
and they really took advantage of the fact that, well, yeah, because Adams is hurt, McKinney's out, and you don't have Dest to try to come up the right. So you guys are already super deep in your roster, and now and it's just going to help us shut the midfield down. And for those first 10-ish minutes, we saw that until Christian made that run and Joe Scally hit that ball over the top. And the thought that I had when that happened was, that's something we couldn't do before. We didn't have guys on the field who understood how to change the style and how to be inventive and creative. And there are a lot of people who believe that, that was because BJ Callahan just put a roster together and said, I trust you guys, go figure it out and do it. And if that's the case, I want to see more of that from Gregg. But also, to give credit where credit's due, there's also a chance that Gregg had instilled that in them, and the World Cup pressure was too much for them to want to take those risks. So, I'm hoping that over these next 4 years, that's something that we see.
Yeah, I think so. And I think I saw somebody, had an article. This was about when Gregg was hired. They said the coach only has so much influence. If you really want to improve, you need better players. And the fact that we have Reyna and Balogun, the team is infinitely better because of those two positions specifically.
And Balogun is a direct credit to, and you were somebody, and so I'll let you kind of elaborate on this. You were somebody who was very adamant, both in our podcast and in our texting and phone calls that we had, that this is something Gregg does really well. His administration got a lot of these international players to make commitments, right? In Dest, in Robinson, now in Balogun,
Musa.
in Zendaya, in Musa. So,
Yeah. No, absolutely. That is something he has done very well, is he has recruited well. He has made those, who knows what kind of promises or whatever he has made to them, but he has made it attractive for them to choose the U.S. Now, obviously, you can argue like, well, these guys weren't starting for their other countries, so of course they came to a place where they would start. But that still wasn't happening for many years in the past. They were choosing to be the third string on their, whatever their other national team was, because it was still more prestigious than the U.S. Now they're not choosing that, and some of these guys, Balogun, because he's young, he's currently, probably would have been third or fourth on the England depth chart.
mm-hmm.
But that's only because they have, Kane and Rashford and Sterling and all these other players. But,
and Phil Foden.
you give him,
Jack Grealish.
You give him 5 years and he would have moved up that depth chart. Harry Kane is gone in 5 years, probably. And obviously Rashford's still going to be up there, but he's right there competing with Rashford in 5 years if he stays with England. And being able to convince him that no, come star for us now and develop with us rather than waiting for your shot at England, that is something that has not happened before.
Right, and to put your money where your mouth is, because he started. I was very worried that we were going to repeat, because there's still scars, right? This still cuts deep. It still cuts deep. And so there was this moment, as we're using the app, looking like a hair hanging on my face right now, bothering the snot out of me. We're using the app and we're sending our starting lineups back and forth, and all of us have Balogun in, right? All three of us are just like, it's Balogun. Like, we're going to start him.
It has to be, right?
It has to be. But I still had that moment in my stomach where I was like, gosh, like all the head coaches have burned me before. Like, we're going to start Pepe.
They're going to start Pepe, and Balogun's going to come in with like 15 minutes left.
Right, and we're not going to get to see anything, and we're not going to play him the ball, and then the media's going to be like, I don't know, this guy's overhyped or whatever, and I was just like, oh my gosh. But so that was super nice to see that, because one, we're staying good on that promise, right? We're going to bring you in, you're going to star right now, and star he did. Like it wasn't, he wasn't a player to me that was just like, he played like good, and we're like, I don't know, he's good, and he probably fits the team, but like not like, he was an arm and a leg above anybody else we've played up in that position, both in his talent level, his ability to finish, and the confidence that he exuded on the field. You could tell the way he vibed with the players and the chemistry that he had. It was all there.
Yeah.
But that aside, to touch on something that you had said before, the previous players that we had that jumped into the roster, like, was Jermaine Jones, who, despite the media's attempt to try to cover any of reality up, everybody knew, of course you're not going to play for Germany. You're not good enough to play for Germany. This is Germany's golden year. Like, duh, you're going to come to the United States. And so we tried to hype it up as much as we could, but anybody who had half a brain was just like, oh my gosh, like, I don't want somebody's leftovers. I want somebody who wants to play for this team. And so when you have a Dest who, I mean, let's be real, people. If they're playing in the Premier League somewhere else and they're starting on that Premier League team, They could be playing for another country.
Yeah.
Right? Other countries aren't dumb. Like, Dest might not be the best player on AC Milan or whatever, but, like, he's still playing for AC Milan. He's still good enough to do it, right? You know,
Yeah. No,
Anthony
absolutely.
Robinson is starting for Fulham. Like, sure, Fulham's not great. They were 6th at the table for most of the season. Like, they're, you know, and sure, it's England, but, like, he could have been the 2nd or 3rd guy on their roster and been totally content with that.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
You know, and so it is. It's exciting to see that we got these players coming in and making a difference. And so I do think that that's something that Gregg does deserve a lot of credit for. I was talking to my friend Joe, and he said, you know, I'm excited that we got Gregg back so we can just start going forward and we can let Gregg build this team. And he said similar things to what you and I just talked about, that it's nice to get these players in because now players want to play for the United States, right?
Yeah.
You know, I think it's a huge sign, and it's not. It's careful not to understate the value that when players are choosing not to play for Mexico to play for the United States instead, that's a huge shift in the dynamics of CONCACAF.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, and we have just watched for the last 4 years Mexico fall apart. And obviously that's bigger than soccer, right? Just like Canada's growth is bigger than soccer. Right? And U.S. soccer is bigger than like there's a lot of inner, you know, dynamics of politics and country and economics and all this other stuff.
Yeah.
But so, yeah, so it's a big shift and it's nice. But thinking about all of those things now, right? So now we got Gregg. What, going forward, what is success? Right? And I mean this in a couple different parts. So I'll stage it for you and let you unpack it. Obviously, we're hosting the next World Cup, okay? So, and we're getting there guaranteed, okay, because we're hosting. So, some part of success is going to be a result in that World Cup and the pressure it is to get these guys and establish the 26 men that are going to have to get there. We're going to be playing in the Copa America, right? So, some kind of a result is there. And then there's this immediate future, right, over the next year or so with friendlies, with camp development, with a lot of the youth guys, you know, and so we kind of have 3 or 4 different phases. Do you think Gregg's going to be given a shot at all of those? And if he is, what determines his success? What does he need to do to be successful in each of those phases?
I think for the next 2 years, success is going to look like developing a solid rotation and a solid understanding of the depth chart for the U.S. And, you know, I think they had a good start on that this summer with the 2 different rosters, the Nations League roster and the Gold Cup roster, the overlap between them, and, you know, kind of understanding what guys are solid, you know, starting top tier players, what guys are in the middle and, you know, working their way towards that, and what guys are maybe the journeymen who are at that lower level, but they'll help us get through, you know, some of these lesser tournaments. So, you know, last cycle was all about just getting as much growth and as much youth and as many prospects as possible, you know, get them all in, get them all playing time, figure out which ones look better, figure out which ones are good, and, you know, start working towards having a better team and a better player pool. That was what last cycle was about. This cycle is about firming that up, taking these players that you've recruited and developed and, you know, getting the top tier ones to be really pushing their careers along in their clubs, and to be they have the confidence that, you know, when they come to camp and when they are on a roster, they're going to have playing time and they're going to be able to make an impact on the team.
Yeah.
And then for the okay, go ahead.
Yeah. So on that note, we do find ourselves sort of back at that square one spot, right? With the difference being, we have a World Cup roster of players that, for the most part, starters plus probably 4 or 5 guys, seem to be pretty solidified, right?
Yeah.
They're not going away. The other guys that were on the roster are guys that are probably going to be too old and have kind of already worked their way out, right? Like we know we're not seeing Acosta, we know we're not seeing Yedlin, we know we're not seeing Roldan, we're probably not going to see Morris. Like these guys are all just kind of like I really hope not. Morris was the one I was like, I don't know, do I say this? Like maybe he still does, but like they're probably not, right? We're just kind of we're not going to see Johnson. We're not going to see Sean Johnson.
No.
And if we do, it's going to be as a third string, right? Because I think Gaga is just going to have stepped into that spot. But that being said, how quickly do some of these players need to earn these spots? Because unlike this last time, there's not 26 spots up for grabs. Right?
Yeah.
So when you think about all these young guys that you're talking about, what is the time frame? Like, you think 2 years is the appropriate time frame, or do you think that after that players might still sneak in?
I think 2 years should be the goal. If we're looking at this year, not really as a part of that. Like I guess it's about 2 years, because it should be by the end of the summer of 2025, we should pretty much know what our World Cup roster is going to be. Outside of maybe like 3 spots that, could be up for grabs, could be wild cards.
Right, because they'll be making the announcement around the group state, around like the draw in that January, December time.
Yeah.
That's fair.
That is what the top teams do. If you look at the Spains, Germany, Brazil, all of these other top teams, first of all, they have their best players and their top team pretty regularly. Mm-hmm. But if you were to go to them in, that 10 months before a World Cup starts, if you looked at their camp, you would say, okay, look, they know who their top 20 players are. You can tell. Like, they understand these are their best 20 players. They're the ones who are going to, get us to the World Cup and get us through the World Cup.
Agreed.
And there might be 4 or 5 who could jump into that.
Right.
And that's where we need to be.
Yeah. And that means, when you think about that the message to the current players, and I mean current as in also these guys on this Gold Cup roster, is you really only have this year to prove to the clubs that you're on that you either are worth starting, or to get yourself a loan and a transfer out of there to get somewhere where you're going to get the playing time, right? And if you're a starter, like if you're somebody like Christian and you're somebody like Brendan Aronson, like I know Leeds is going to be in a lot of trouble, and all these poor jerseys I bought are all worthless now because most of the players have it in their contract that they're just not going.
Yeah.
Timothy Weah it looks like he secured a deal with Juventus, and he's going to be moving in that direction. I think that was just announced today as I was like browsing through articles. But all those players aside, if you're some of the names, and we'll get to them in the Gold Cup tomorrow, and if you look at the roster, you will have the same reaction as us. I don't know any of these players. Those guys, I'm thinking you have 1 year to prove yourself, not internationally, not for the national team, but for whatever your club is, to give yourself a chance to transfer out, to earn a starting spot that the coaches and the coaching staff for the U.S. team are going to notice you and are going to think it's worth giving this guy a shot. Because one of the things I know that didn't factor in as much for us that I thought would was your performance for the national team.
Yeah.
Right? With the exception of maybe like Ferreira and Pepe, we had some guys play for us that played pretty poorly when they showed up on our squad, but were playing very well in the leagues they were in. Like Haji Wright is an example. He saw some playing time because he was playing so well in the Turkish league, despite not really doing anything for us. So yeah, that's just, me, kind of making those things off of what you said. But so now phase 2, right? So now you've taken your years. Now we got Copa America, right? If Gregg's still around in Copa America, what does success look like there?
If you're looking at Copa America in general, that's South America and Central and North America all together, right?
I believe so, yeah.
So the reality is we should be up there challenging, maybe not challenging to win Copa America, but...
And it's going to be in the United States. Copa America
is
going to be in the United States.
It's Brazil and Argentina and then the U.S. I mean, I understand Uruguay, Colombia, Paraguay, they all have good teams. But if you're looking on that real international world level, we should be up there with the top teams in Copa America. And so that's what success is going to look like. A semifinal appearance to me, that's what success should look like.
So the teams for this tournament, there are going to be 16 teams. Argentina, Bolivia, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Ecuador, Paraguay, Peru, Uruguay, and Venezuela. And then all of the CONCACAF Nations League A semifinalists, which is us, Canada, Mexico, and Panama?
I think it was Panama.
I think it was Panama. So
Yeah.
those are going to be, and then to be determined play-in round winners. So probably 2 more Cotton Bowl teams because I can't see anybody else in CONCACAF. And maybe I'm wrong because it gets pretty deep in Cotton Bowl, but I'm guessing it's going to be 2 more. So when you look at that, that's really good competition for the United States.
Yeah, and teams like Chile and Ecuador, on the right years, they have very good teams. They kind of go up and down, but I'm still looking at that, and I'm saying like Brazil and Argentina, they are better, and they're going to be better, and I hope we can challenge them, but I'm not expecting us to beat them. The rest of those teams, if we played them in a match, I'm saying we should win.
So as long as the tournament lines up, you believe, unless you're playing in Argentina or Brazil, you're putting a W on the board. That's the route to success. If you get knocked out by one of those 2 teams, it's okay, and maybe we shouldn't look into it too much, even if it's in that first round or whatever group, whatever. I'm not super familiar with the tournament structure, but
in group stage, I'm okay if we have a close loss or a draw to one of those other second tier comparable teams like Uruguay, Paraguay, Chile, Ecuador. I would be okay with one tight game that's a draw or a loss there. But yeah, I mean, if we're not in a group with Argentina or Brazil, we should be winning our group. And then we really should only get knocked out by those 2 teams.
I agree.
That's what success should look like.
Mm-hmm. And I second that, and I agree because it echoes what Ryan and I had been talking about, and a lot of the people have been saying when you say like you're the kings of CONCACAF, that should be like that should just be like the basic reality, right? Like we're the United States, we got superior all this other stuff. We're done being the guys that just get kicked around and beaten up by, our whole childhood growing up, it was like third world countries were beating us in this sport. And it wasn't unacceptable because there were third world. It was unacceptable because we go to the Olympics and we do all this stuff. Like, why is soccer the only sport that we can't do? So I think that's the logical next step. It feels like we've secured our dominance in CONCACAF. I don't really see any reason for it slipping away outside of us playing like B to C tier teams. So now let's develop some players and let's put a roster together to show the world that no, we do mean business. And outside of maybe the world powerhouse teams, which it's okay to lose to, because
they all lose to each other all the time,
right? And we're keeping our FIFA ranking in the top 10. So like you lose to somebody around the top 10 spots, that's pretty normal, right? That's appropriate. Yeah. That means your ranking is where it's supposed to be. So I agree with those. And so now Gregg does this, right? He builds a roster for 2 years. He's still good. Nobody has any qualms. We do great in Copa America. Maybe we make quarter semis, get knocked out by a big team. Now the roster's set. We select the right players. We make it to the World Cup. It's on home soil. What does Gregg have to do? Because I don't see him getting another spot after this. I think we could win the World Cup and we're still not going to rehire Gregg. And like maybe if we win the World Cup,
if we won the World Cup, they would rehire him. But outside of that, yes, I agree with you.
Well, because I mean, even some other countries don't after they win. But anyway, so outside of winning the World Cup and rehiring Gregg, what would Gregg have to do to kind of solidify his legacy and to walk away with people going, not only was he successful, but he has a. Do you think he has a chance to be like the greatest head coach that U.S. Soccer has seen?
He definitely has a chance to do that, yes, because he I mean, it's hard to say because, as we said before, the coach only has so much impact. The reality is, we have a much, much better team than we've ever had before, talent wise, and where they're playing. So, give him credit that he brought this team together and he's giving them a unified vision and they are playing for each other and playing well. So, yes, he could be up there in that. Um, People hate on him. I still appreciate, like I said before, Jurgen Klinsmann and the fact that he's kind of started this movement towards
Mm-hmm.
this greater identity and drive for better American soccer players. But he he needs to do better than this World Cup and better in that.
So do we have to win our group?
It depends on who's in our group.
Well, I'm saying that because since we're the host, you know that we're going to be in Group A, B, or C. Now, granted, this is going to be expanded. It's going to be an expanded World Cup.
True.
But we're
True.
going to
So
be in one of the first three groups.
So we shouldn't land one of the powerhouse teams.
Right. And depending on how
they
do
they
it.
get seeded after that.
Correct. So depending on how they do it,
True.
they might, they're debating only having 3 teams in each group. Now, they could still have 4, but they're debating it being, 3 or something like that. So to me, I'm thinking like you
Yeah,
have
if
to
you're
win your
talking
group.
about the seeding in that way, then yes, we should win our group.
Okay.
Because
So,
the only teams I'm thinking that we would not win our group against would be teams like Germany, Spain, France. I mean, even England, I would say we're at a point we can challenge them to win a group, absolutely, as we just saw in the last
right.
World
You
Cup.
get Brazil in your group, you get Argentina in your group.
Brazil, yeah. And Argentina, Messi's probably not playing the next World Cup, so Argentina's not going to be anywhere near as good as they were.
Yeah, he's going to be
Even
an
though they have a
American
lot of good
for
young
the next
players.
World Cup.
Yeah,
Let's
totally.
get those pink jerseys out.
So, yeah, I would say win the group. And if you're winning the group, then you should be playing somebody who's not as good. So, that's making the quarterfinals. And then it's so hard to say because it does depend on what the draw is and who the opponent is. But a good showing in the quarterfinals is what we need. Whether that's
Ooh, okay. So
beating
hold
a
on.
team. Okay.
We got. I don't know how legitimate this is. I'm gonna read it to you. So this is. I seriously don't know how legitimate this is, but I did a Google search for the 2026 World Cup, and there's a whole bunch of dates and stuff on here. I don't know how accurate this is, but it says the 2026 World Cup will have a record number of groups. It will contain 48 qualifying groups in 12 groups designated A to L. In each group, 2 countries that end at the top in a round robin tournament advance to the knockout stage, as well as the 8 best number 3s.
That's a very expanded tournament.
It's a very expanded tournament. So there'll be 4 countries per group. I want to see if I can find this information anywhere else because that's wild. This is now on FIFA's official website. 3 countries, 16 cities, 48 teams.
It is 48 teams. See, I thought it was only going to be 36 teams. No, it was 36 teams. Okay, no, yeah, it is 48 teams. Okay. Wow.
Where is it? Does it show me?
12 groups of 4.
Can I see the schedule anywhere? I can't find it on. I don't want to view the countries and cities. I want to view who is hosting, who qualifies, what stadiums. See, so the official FIFA site doesn't have what the bracket is going to look like. Oh, wait. How will it work with 48 teams? Yeah, we'll replace by 12 groups of 4. The top 2 teams plus the 8 best third-place teams. Okay, so now hearing that, does that change anything you said? So you're still going to get a group of 4. Do we still? To me, I'm thinking we still got to win the group. But now you have groups I, J, K, and L. So we're gonna have 4 additional groups. that are going to make it into this thing, which significantly stretches the top tier teams and your chances of having to play them in your group stage. So I think it's fair to say winning the group still is on the table.
Winning the group should be the goal. That's what success would look like. And winning the first round of the knockout, if that's the way they line up, then we should be winning the first stage of the knockout.
Because then you're going to 32 teams.
Yeah.
Right? So now we're going to go to 32, which is the knockout, right?
Yeah.
And then you're going to go to 16. So it still feels a little bit the same.
There's one extra knockout round, yeah.
Yeah. And so now are you thinking quarterfinals, semifinals? Like, to me, on home soil, Gregg's got to get to the semifinals. If we don't get to the semifinals, I don't think we've done it. So unless it's some heartbreak or something.
With the extra knockout round, I would say minimum is make it to the quarterfinals. And then depending on who the opponent is, if it's not one of the top 6 to 8 teams in the world, we should be winning that quarterfinal. If it is one of those teams, then it has to at least look like a good game.
Mm-hmm. Now, what if we are one of the top 6 to 8 teams in the world?
Awesome.
Because there's a chance, right? There's a chance with the player pool we have. We could go into this next FIFA tournament ranked in the top 8. We could go ranked not in the top 5. I don't see it happening just because of the way FIFA politics work, but like we could be 5th, right? Like I think 5th is reasonable.
I mean, yeah, because Argentina probably won't be as high up anymore. But I mean, you're thinking France is still up there.
I can't see England not still being up there.
Yeah, and who knows about Germany and Italy and Spain? They've been up and down quite a bit. So yeah, I mean it's possible. It is a possibility for sure.
I appreciate you honoring that. That's a possibility. Yeah. Well, cool. All right, so that gives us a good outline for all of those things. It feels kind of good to get all that out of the way. So I don't really think there's much else to say. I mean, anything else you think is relevant here with the Gregg situation? It's just kind of get to it.
Just to put the overall feeling of it is, I'm a little disappointed, but I understand, and I'm hopeful.
Yeah.
Tim, you're gonna have to finish up and do the outro. My son is awake and is sad.
Yeah.
So.
No, I mean, I think we're good, though. So, hey, we appreciate you guys tuning in and checking everything out. Chris is going to go take care of his kid. We are going to get excited for tomorrow's game. We appreciate you guys tuning in. Give us your thoughts and comments below on Gregg. Was this the right call and not the right call? Share the video, like the video, do whatever you got to do. We will be bringing you guys some Gold Cup coverage over the weekend. We are excited. We will take it